stream onto, yeah, it'll kick in a second.
And how are you going, mate?
Excellent. I'm excellent. Thank you. How is your recovery going with the knee?
Yeah, it's good. Really good. It's been a great personal journey as well. Being able to sort of practice what I preach and sort of really take a deeper dive into sort of the emotional toll that pain and disability takes. It's been really enlightening. And being in the fast lane of the AFL, I think the rush to get back and get immediate results, possibly at the cost of long-term health, has been something I've been conscious of. So being able to take the long game sort of approach has been really enjoyable. Just focus on the process and trust the process, and it's showing some good results so far.
So yeah, as a physio, as an expert in injury recovery, how was it to actually have an injury where you needed to end up getting surgery?
Yeah, it was tough straight away mentally. I think I'm another young Aussie guy. You think you're invincible. I've been pretty lucky to get through 36 years without any major trauma, and being able to basically do as I please from a physical point of view. And it really did come out of the blue. So August last year, going for a sort of a run after work at work and doing some shorter intervals, and all of a sudden the sniper in the bushes got me, and I went down, and within half an hour the knee blows up like a melon, and it hits you pretty quickly that there's something major going on. So there's a lot to deal with at the time, from a physical point of view, but also the reality of being physical is part of my profession, and my ability to provide for my family. So the uncertainty around that hit me as well. And so fortunately, being in the situation that I am and was working at the time in the AFL, I was able just to talk to some people in the game pretty quickly and get things sorted. Was able to get a scan and get clarity on what was going on. Unfortunately, got the news that the injury I had sustained was a pretty reasonable meniscal tear and the medial aspect of the posterior horn on my left knee. A flap had became lodged in the sort of posterior recess of my knee, and it really wasn't going anywhere. And I sat on it for probably a week or two, deliberating whether I should take it on as a conservative management approach, but I was really disabled, unable to do my job. So chatting to a few surgeons that I knew, they gave me some pretty reassuring news that they felt it would just be a small procedure. Being at the age that I'm at, they felt we'd try to preserve the integrity of the joint as much as possible, take out the minimal viable dose, and I should be back on my feet pretty quickly. So I went through with that and had surgery start of September. Early signs were okay. I took things pretty gently in the first couple of weeks. Swelling was going down. However, I reached a plateau pretty quickly, and wasn't quite sure what I mean, I know from a lot of experience as a physiotherapist in the medical field, you should have a pretty steady rate of progression with swelling coming down, movement recovering. But I hit a snag pretty quickly and just wasn't going anywhere. And it wasn't through doing anything out of reasonable guidelines for rehab. It just continued to be swollen. The catching persisted. And so I took the pedal off a little bit and slowed things down, chatted to the docs. We re-scanned it, and it had just shown that the tear had progressed even further than the original. And chatting to the surgeon, he put his hand up and said straight away, look, I went as minimally invasive as possible, tried to be as conservative as I could, and probably in hindsight should have done more at the time. So we decided to go back in and do the job that we probably should have done at the start. But since then, it's been really good. So it's followed sort of the course that I would have expected. Given the second bout of surgery, I've been a little bit slower because it's meant a bit of a longer period. I haven't been at full function. So about 7 weeks post-surgery for the second surgery. But that's probably now about 3.5 months since the original surgery. So it's a fair bit of time out of action. but all things going well at the moment, mate. So fingers crossed, we're on track.
I've heard of a few people, not runners, mind you, and before my time with ATG, long before that, I've heard of a few people saying if you squat really heavy after a knee injury, then it'll, like especially meniscal tear, that it'll kind of resolve itself with the force. Is that like a wives' tale, or, what's your, it sounds like a brutal kind of approach, sort of like snapping your own nose back into place, or, putting your shoulder back in by the trainer at the boxing ring and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I think you hear that a little bit with spinal injuries as well. So a vertebrae out of place, a disc out, and getting that put back in. I think thinking of the analogy of the cartilage, which is acting as a force transmitter through the knee, it had peeled off its attachment. It had folded on itself. It had also dislodged a piece, so there was a loose body floating in around there. In theory, could you manipulate it to a point where it unfolds itself? Possibly. I think the amount of traction that you would need through that knee for the injury that I had at the posterior horn of meniscus would be something beyond our sort of capability to accurately do without potentially causing more harm. But given the fact that I had a little floating spot in there, like that was just going to keep floating around and potentially keep pissing off the knee. So I, for about 5 minutes, I did think I could try and have a crack at doing something to try and resolve it, but not with my case. Other cases, look, I don't know if taking an injury like that to the line is probably best practice. However, with minor stable meniscal pathologies, yeah, absolutely. I don't think we need to rush into surgery at all. And I've helped manage a number of conservative programs to get guys back to where they need to be with particular meniscal injuries. A lot of that will depend on the size of the injury, the location of it, the relative blood supply to it, the level of function the athlete wants to get back to and where they've come from, training history, a lot of things. But yeah, for me, that was sort of all roads led to surgery, unfortunately.
Yeah, the time frames, and say for someone in the US who is going to have to pay for the surgery themselves or go into a massive debt for it, if they're not a professional athlete, if they don't have a fast sort of time frame, then maybe, and the extent of the injury, there are a lot of factors, as you say, like would determine whether you wanted to go that path. I think a lot of people, athletes, have probably experienced some degree of meniscal catching or, some sensation. I know I have a few times. I didn't really know what it was, when I first sort of had it, something that sort of hang around for a few days, or you get it with certain movement and then it just sort of fades away. It doesn't really get in the way too much. There's maybe a little bit of a weird sensation or pain, but it seems as though it's possible to have a little bit of something going on that definitely, probably doesn't need any kind of intervention and can fade away.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think you can use the analogy of an ankle sprain with that.
Yeah.
You can take the knee beyond its passive physiological range and cause a minor irritation to the tissue, whether it's a torsional load with the axial compression going down through the knee and a twist, which can, piss off, create an inflammatory reaction and set off the pain pathways. But again, without any obvious sign of pathology and with the inflammatory reaction settling quickly, regaining function, it's full steam ahead. I don't think we need to worry too much about some of those little ones.
So we've been going on this ATG journey together. I've been having discussions about the knee, and you've been looking at my kind of musings on how it all works, like why a lot of people have had knee injuries, or especially connective, like tendon issues, for a very long time, and then ATG seems to do the job for them. I've been trying to break down, why that might be happening with my sort of strength coach brain. What are your thoughts coming more from a physio perspective and looking at this through that lens?
I think absolutely the system that the ATG program brings is scalable to any level. And especially with the Zero program that I started with last year, looking at that from a injury management or injury prevention point of view, it's all designed to be within pain-free guidelines. It's all designed to be within pain-free guidelines. It's all designed to be within your own physical limitations. And that's really sound advice. And just because it's not coming from a medical professional, that doesn't mean that it's not the right way to go about it. I've been blown away by some of the simple concepts that have made huge differences with this program that are just not on the radar of mainstream, I guess, medical health and sort of the physiotherapy model that we just don't tend to see. A lot of the work has to be evidence-based through rigorous, or sometimes not so rigorous, research. And by the time that does get out there, it's generally playing catch up to the cutting edge of what's happening in the industry. And so for you guys and Ben and the other crew that have been involved in this, being at the coalface for a long time and working their way through problem solving in the real world, you've come to a conclusion that there's a really good scalable way to start from zero and inactive or deconditioned or injured and gradually expose through progressive load, progressive range to the point where you can function and regain your freedom of movement. It's been really, really good to see.
Yeah, so you started to present to some physios and people in your community about the concept of short and long range. I know you recently did a presentation. How was that received?
Yeah, it was deer in the headlights a little bit. A few guys were not quite sure where I was coming from initially, but then when I was able to show the analogies of how do you make it apply in a real world setting, just with some basic bodybuilding sort of movements of sort of the bicep short and long range and the tricep. But then I sort of took it to applying it to the lower limb, and particularly how obviously there's a bit of robust evidence around isometric loading as pain relieving strategies for tendons. So I use the Achilles tendon analogy. However, the short range movement of loading that tendon and loading the calf complex, I think it really does achieve the same thing, if not greater. It just hasn't been through any peer-reviewed scientific evidence or rigor of research, which I'm sure if it got pitted against isometrics, it would hold its own, if not be beyond that. So it's science is catching up, and it's just going to take some time as these new concepts are exposed.
Where does it fit for you in practice now? If someone has tendon pain, isometrics versus short range, where it's not isometric in the short range.
Yeah, I'm probably looking at short range work at sort of high volume to try and help rewire the body as sort of you've described, and rewire the brain just to start to accept loading through that range. I think doing some early sled push work in that shortened range as well sort of ticks off both, where you're going through sort of long, slow triple extension gait patterns, and there's time where you are in that isometric position, but it's also going through a modified range. So I had a guy today who's got an insertional Achilles pathology that's going on right now, which he's a distance runner, runs 100 Ks a week, does his pre-run isometrics because he's had Achilles on the other side before, so he's just kept that going. Had a bit of a training sort of error around a rebuild after another injury, and he's left with a massively swollen insertional Achilles. Now, he doesn't handle being at the top of a plantar flexed ankle position because of the compression that's going on at that insertion. Doesn't handle being at the bottom either because of the lengthened relationship that creates compression there as well. But going through a mid-range position, particularly in a bent knee calf raise, felt great and helped relieve his symptoms. So it's using those principles in the right setting has been really beneficial. Really beneficial.
So like a seated calf raise without being not all the way at the top, not all the way at the bottom.
Seated calf raise from neutral to about 3/4 of the way to the top.
Yeah, yeah. That very top bit seems to create some sort of you think it's compression when it's right at the top that's the issue, or is it some kind of folding?
Well, there's generally ankle compression. Certainly the posterior sort of joint can get jammed up. So I just wonder whether right at that anthesis lining at the back of the calcaneus, there's some kind of jamming that's going on there. Whether it's folding on itself and creating sensitivity, I think tissue's getting squeezed. Yeah. And so it was painful, and I'll just try and keep him out of that for now and keep him mid-range, and we'll see how that progresses.
See, yeah, that the very short position for the Achilles seems to be more problematic than the very short position for the quad. Would you say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Quad tendons?
Yeah, other than naturally mobile people that hyperextend quite well. So if you hyperextend a little bit more than neutral and go to sort of 10 degrees into hyperextension, and you've got the capacity to maintain quad load in that range, I've seen a few that can be a bit provoked there. And again, whether it's the tendon that's provoking it or your fat pad that's just getting a bit of a pinch there.
Yeah, cool. That's an interesting one. So with this guy he's had some swelling there. What was it? Change in load was that the
Yeah, yep. So 2021, second half of 2021, he had a sacral stress fracture. So he had a fair bit of time off, which is I didn't know too much about them, but apparently in distance runners that can be something which comes up. And so as a result of that, he has gradually built himself back up. His long runs on the weekend are basically going up 2 or 3 Ks every week. So he was up to 20 Ks on the weekend. He also works as a bike mechanic. So he's on his feet a fair bit. So on the weekend was his longer run. He did 20 Ks. Prior to that, no issue. Did his 20K run, started to get a bit sore towards the end, but he runs to work. So then had a full day at work. By the end of his shift at work, it was huge. So he had his 20 Ks plus he's on his feet. He does about 8 to 10,000 steps on his feet at work. And I think that single dose just obviously tipped him over the edge, but it was probably grumbling along prior to that.
Walking seems to be problematic for, like, being on your feet seems to be problematic for that insertional Achilles stuff.
Yeah, I think it depends on your footwear particularly. So I've seen heel obviously changing in your heel raise can change your compressive load at the insertion, but then also your foot position in your shoe. So a number of physios might just chuck a couple of heel raises into your shoe to lift you up a little bit, to offload that end range sort of dorsiflexion, but that actually lifts your heel up into the heel counter. If you sit nice and comfortably here and then suddenly you get a little raise, you can just be abutting the back of the rigid part of the shoe, which can create more compressive load and piss things off a bit more.
So, yeah, we were discussing the heel lift issue.
Yeah. I think the compressive nature of that emphasis can either be driven from or provoked by sort of your footwear setup and how high you are with your heel once it is provoked, or then if you've got that internal heel raise as well, that can jam you up a little bit more. And we saw a few of that with a few of our AFL guys have led to actually having surgery to have to try and offload that insertional compression. However, that's generally not always sort of the cause. I mean, I'm not one to keep advocating for people to get into higher and higher heel lifts. I think it's more when symptoms do flare in that short term, you might get some pain reduction, being in a little elevated heel to take some compressive load away.
Yeah. So he's going to go through. So what I was going to ask also about foot posture. Is that arch collapsed, or does he have a strong foot? He's running a lot, so I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's pretty. He's rigid guys from Sweden originally. Pretty slight triathlete. Done a few Ironmans. Pretty high tone kind of guy through his calves. Although not strong, but a pretty bouncy running pattern and pretty rigid foot posture. So he needs a little bit of long-term conditioning. But a lot of the time when these guys are running this many Ks, it's hard to get the work in the gym in as well. So it's just about educating him that potentially, and working with our coaches. Really, we've got a couple of good coaches that are really starting to realise that the higher mileage is not always the necessary beast with certain athletes. You still perform well if gym is indicated to be a number one priority as opposed to getting the big Ks in.
What do you think about sleds? Like, we've been sort of playing around with the idea in the community, substituting some of the running volume with sled pushing.
Yeah.
Have you played around with that?
The coaches that I work with, they're big on hills, really big on hill repeats. So we haven't got a sled in our facility at the moment. I think got on order the tank on wheels for our current setup is going to be the way to go. But the hill training is a big piece. So hill repeats from a strength and power output point of view and also from a strength, endurance, and rolling hills for our longer guys getting out on the trails is a big piece. So,
yep. Would you say the hills are more concentric, more connective tissue impact relative to sleds? If you wanted to put on a continuum between regular running, hills, sleds, would you say like the elastic component is sort of decreasing on that continuum?
Yeah, I think so. I think your hills are going to have more elastic load than the sled work. Do you have that kind of experience?
Yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. That I think the hills can really play a good role in potentially transitioning between someone being in a rehab setting where they're getting a lot of sled work, they're in pain, they can't go for those, they can't run, they can't go for those long runs. It seems as though the hill could be a good potential, place to go to increase. And if you find different slopes, a really steep hill, especially for an Achilles thing, that'd be a bigger concern. But if you're going backwards up the hill, that might be something that you can do pain-free pretty early on, because you've got that short range position at the ankle, you've got the plantar flexion, but then, you could, gradually changing the slope, I think is probably something that's underutilized potentially in transition back to running. If you had that sled hill and then flat ground running continuum, it makes a lot of sense potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even the hill running for Achilles could be problematic if they're exposed to it at the wrong time. But I think particularly for the insertional Achilles, it does get you out of dorsiflexion, and so you're going to be forefoot striking generally in that sort of mid neutral range. So as long as you've got some good underlying elastic capacity built upon, whether it is sleds or another variation, I think you'd be right.
Yeah, well, for the Achilles, it'd be the reverse hill would fit before flat ground running, but up the hill might come after flat ground running. Where for the knee, you might find that you tolerate uphill, like for patella tendon or quad tendon, you might find you tolerate uphill running, especially if you mix it in with some backwards first. You might tolerate that before you tolerate high speed, flat ground stuff or agility, change of direction, stopping.
Yeah, we've got a park in Perth called Kings Park, which has got a thing called Jacob's Ladder, which is 400 or 500 steps. And so the stair climbing is another option that we've used with a lot of benefit, particularly pre-running, just using it for that strength, endurance and that short range, doing those repeats for knees and lower limb as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that kind of almost is a step up. So you take from step up to steps to flat ground. Like you could look at it as potentially a pathway, and they could be happening simultaneously. You're just aware of the degree of connective tissue dominance versus muscle dominant. When it's really slow and there's not much stretch, then it's very muscle dominant. And as you become more explosive and add more stretch, then it's going to challenge the connective tissue more, right?
Absolutely.
I wanted to touch on the concept around the joint dominance. I don't know if you've read any of my thoughts or writing around that, but basically the idea is that we need a framework of thinking this exercise, we're not actually doing it for the muscle growth when we're not really concerned as much from that perspective. What we're doing it for is to change the joint structure. And this exercise has big potential to change joint structure and therefore big potential to aggravate the joint. And so we need to be paying attention not to whether the load moves, but to what's going on in the joint. How is the joint responding to what we're doing here? So I've kind of got a number of movements there. Behind the neck press is one in that continuum. Poliquin step up, Peterson step up are other examples of that, where it's not so much how much load you can lift or what the muscle's capable of doing, but what is the joint sensation, and is the joint able to tolerate this? Any thoughts around that kind of concept?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you refer to the Poliquin step up, the increased patellofemoral pressure that's occurring on the way down, it's certainly a conditioning tool for your ability to withstand that pressure. And that's something I've been using more recently since sort of being exposed to some of that work. Did a little bit of that sort of concept with Ido Portal a few years ago, but then again, that came from Charles. But certainly when we're retraining and reconditioning patellofemoral situations where that tends to be the provocative activity of that forward translation of the knee. A lot of people will say, steer clear of that provocative activity. However, gradual exposure in a safe framework absolutely can condition mechanoreceptors around there, condition the joint chondral surfaces and cartilage to be able to withstand pressure. I still think that you do need some muscular support as an underlying framework around that, and so that's where it's probably at the same time that you're doing a higher volume of your short range work, particularly if you're talking knees and above and below that knee joint in concurrence with it. But absolutely, I think that's it's a undervalued area and a really under-researched area as well.
Yeah, I think for strength coaches, that mental model might make a difference where you think, well, this athlete can get up and down on Poliquin step-ups or Peterson step-ups. They can do that with body weight on the bar. If you were doing another exercise, if you're doing bench presses, then all you care about is the weight on the bar, as long, but I think you need to be more aware of what's going on at the joint. Sure, someone could have shoulder degeneration as well, in which case that would become joint dominant for them because the joint is the weakest link. But if you're introducing these movements like Poliquin step-ups and Peterson step-ups as a strength coach, it's very likely that the joint is the weak link if they're strong athletes. And so I think there's potentially a risk for a strength coach bringing ATG into their system, loading things up from a muscle perspective of like, well, they can handle their load, so let's just keep ramping up because that's how we strength train. But the adaptations in terms of meniscus are going to be chronic. Like, it's going to take years. Ben talks about like a 2-year journey to being able to, I think he didn't play basketball for 2 years, even when he was doing the Poliquin stuff. And so he worked on it without having that explosive, chaotic environment. And I might be misquoting him, on the exact timeframes and things, but then you go back into that chaotic environment, and you're going to get significant joint adaptation if you are doing heavy Petersons, heavy Patricks, split squats, deep squats. So he could have had a lot of remodeling over that period. Like, that sort of seems to be some of what might be going on, why the results with ATG seem to be helping, issues that weren't being solved in the past. And maybe part of the reason why it's different to isometrics, because you're getting the tendon adaptation, but you're also potentially getting this other stuff going on that maybe doesn't happen as well with isometrics because you're not getting the same stimulus, you're not getting the same blood flow, different mechanisms, different things going on. Absolutely. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, yeah. And as well as that, I mean, not just thinking of the local adaptations, but what's happening at the cortical level and the central nervous system level. Most people, you use Ben's analogy of he had years and years of pain and issues in that knee. His representation of his knee in his brain, if I go back to my undergrad days and think of that homunculus of the representation of what our body looks like in our brain, the knee is so minuscule. We never pay that much attention to it at all. But for Ben, it'd be one of the biggest parts that would just light up anytime he loaded it, anytime he put stress through it. And what happens then is the amplifier is wound right up. So normally a sensation which wouldn't create pain is creating pain. Well, normally things that would create pain is creating even more pain because the body's so receptive to that feedback. And the brain really changes over time. And then on top of that, it takes a lot of time to recalibrate. So gradual exposure to movement allows the brain to realize, well, this is a new normal. It's okay. I can take my fear away from it. I've got a new context for it. It's safe. Progress forward. But a lot of the research around ACL injuries will show that cortical representation does take up to 2 years to really change. So it really fits with what you're thinking.
And maybe some of that does change differently or faster if you are able to do a lot of sled work that doesn't cause any issues. How are we going to know about that? We're going to know about it sometime in the future. But if people are experiencing different results, like we have Brian in the community, he heads up ACL rehabilitation in a clinic in the States. He's got a number of guys working under him. They have benchmarks of where they need to get to at 12 weeks. They can't get there without the sleds. Like, he's set new standards where they're just not getting there. If they're not following kind of the ATG progression, then the standards are too high to get with the other methods. And so, what's it going to mean over time? I don't know. I think it's really interesting, the transition that we're seeing with ACL. There's more and more pressure on looking at the non-surgical route. Do you see that becoming more accepted outside of professional sport?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some really strong advocates for non-surgical ACL approaches. A couple of the sticking points are concurrent injuries. So if there's a big chondral joint surface injury as well, which can happen as the knee subluxes and creates sort of that impact fracture through the chondral surface. If you were then not to address the ACL, it potentially could lead to increased shearing forces around there and down the track, I guess, accelerate the degenerative process. So you need to be really clear with what your long-term goals are if you are presenting with that. If you're a 60-year-old person that isn't going to try and get back to high-level function and change direction activity, and they've got that, then yeah, absolutely, you could try a conservative approach. My gut feel would be with a younger athlete who has aspiring goals to get to a high level. If you do have that kind of joint surface injury, which I think is the big one, then that's something you'd need to think, I guess, long and hard about going down the conservative approach. However, a really well laid out conservative management plan with the intention to have surgery and delaying surgery has also been shown to potentially accelerate your return to play time. So I know the All Blacks over in New Zealand and a few of the franchises over there put a lot of emphasis into that pre-surgical conditioning work, get them up to better than before with their strength markers, with their function. Then going for surgery becomes a minor procedure similar to an arthroscope. You respect the post-operative bone healing and proliferation of the ligament, but you might be getting back at sort of 9-10 months rather than your 12 months or earlier. I know they played around with some conservative guys. I think the Olympic sevens, one of their guys had a ACL rupture about 8 weeks out from the Olympics, and they managed him conservatively, got up and won gold. So there are cases out there.
That's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was before Rio 2016.
Yeah.
And that's I guess ahead of the game over there a little bit. That's 6 years ago.
Have you had any contact with Nigel Beach over in New Zealand rugby?
No.
He's a smart guy. He's done a bunch of work with the All Blacks. I think he's in with the Crusaders now. I'll have to connect you guys. We met at a Wim Hof event. Actually,
is he the guy that's done a lot of the archetypal sitting postures? He talked a lot about sort of all the different sort of squat variations. Not the guy that he's published that. And that could be another Beach.
Could be, but I'm not sure if that's his work. If I'm missing that, then I apologize to him. But he's a really sharp guy and really forward thinking in terms of the whole picture around the athlete. And he's got some really good stuff. He's aware of the ATG side of things as well, and he's always looking at what's next. There are a lot of really innovative guys out there, and he's one of them. Yeah. So I'm sure you'd have a good conversation. So you're still working as a clinical physiotherapist, is that?
Yeah, I am at the moment. So I've taken the lead physio role where I'm at the moment until we can sort of build a team sort of around me to help mentor a few of the younger guys. And then I think I can see myself in the next 3 to 5 years still having a lead role there, and sort of balancing out between sort of business management and growth as well as a clinical role, which has been really, really good to be able to take what I've seen in the professional sporting landscape and bring it back into the public sector. And then also, for 8 years, all I saw was male footballers between the ages of 18 and 32. So I had a pretty narrow little landscape there. I hadn't got my hands on kids or seniors or females for a long time. So just getting my head around that, it's been really invigorating.
Is the average career span of an AFL player increasing? You say 32.
Yeah, it is. I think management of the mature athlete is getting better. I think also I can see that the general trend of recruiting mature athletes is becoming a bit more effaced, so they can have an immediate impact on their list and a better investment. So then if you're getting them later, they potentially can survive a little bit longer as well because they haven't been through the rigors of that early sort of survive or not approach that a lot of the clubs still do with the younger ones. But yeah, I mean, it's still a brutal game, much like rugby with your experience. And most of the guys get to the point of that sort of early 30-year-old nature that it's generally joints are the things which are the limiting factor at some point, whether it's hips or knees. But I'm not seeing evidence that sort of we're going to get a sort of a cohort getting into that sort of mid to late 30s, as much as a few of the other sports.
Yeah. I worked with Steve Menzies, who was 40, playing in the English Super League, and he was still a star. He was still carving up. But that was really an anomaly. And he was still in great shape, like better than a lot of the younger guys, the way he could move. But he had a special mentality as well. Really fun to get the opportunity to work with him for a little while. But there's always going to be an outlier or two. I'm not sure if the trend is strong in rugby league either to increase.
Absolutely. And you see, I think there's a tipping point around 27, 28 where the penny drops for the guys all of the time. And then that's when they really do start putting in the extra work and exploring what would be perceived as different, and pulling out all the stops to try and get that longevity of a few more years. If some of the systems that the ATG program is starting to apply get put into junior athlete development and then into embedded sort of induction systems at professional sporting clubs, then who knows?
Yeah, it's fun to think about those possibilities, and a lot of the money comes at the end of the career as well. So it's potentially huge difference financially for an athlete if they can have an extra 2 or 3 years on their peak pay before they either retire or get decline in income because there's a decline in performance and perceived value from the club. Could make a huge impact. Have you felt pressure as a physio to not implement things that you're learning? I know a lot of the guys in the States feel real concern about sort of evidence-based, how far they can deviate from what everybody else is doing. Is that like a strong pressure for you or in Australian physios?
No, I mean, speaking only from personal experience, where I was in the club that I was at, we had a high-performance unit of sort of 12 staff who were really sort of progressive and open-minded. I think I was always seen as the weird guy that would bring in some wacky stuff. And generally, the approach is always drip feed in and show that it can work and you'll get buy-in. And as soon as the players buy in, no matter if the evidence may not be as strong, it makes a big difference. They're the real influencers and they're the investment. So generally, as we said, the 28 to 30-year-old will come to you looking at open to any idea. So you throw them anything like this and they'll see results. And then all of a sudden the younger guys start looking at them and going, what's going on there? And then it becomes part of the culture. And we've done that we did that with handstand work for shoulder prep. We did that with some jiu-jitsu work for tackle technique. Backwards sleds came into the program last year. Prior to that, it was backwards bike, which seemed to be a bit of a popular use of a similar sort of high lactate, short range, probably for a different reason, but that was sort of similar. But we tended to get better results with the backwards sled when we brought that in last year. And again, as soon as you bring it in and normalize it, people don't question it that much. In academia, the physio world at times is quite strong, opinionated, like other sort of industries. There will be people that are at either end of the political landscape with it, and will always call you out if it's not evidence-based. But at the end of the day, you ask them to show them your results and you can show them theirs and you go from there. Always up for a robust discussion, mate.
Yeah, that's the thing, is trying to maintain a dialogue. I think that's one of the things that Ben's done really well, is to not go to war with everybody who doesn't agree with the approach that he's bringing forward. He's really not debating anyone. Has been his approach, which I'm not sure is ideal, but it means all his energy is going into the results side of things, which probably is ideal. Like if everybody gets the absolute best results they can and all they do is keep reviewing, are these results good enough? Are they what I want? He's tried everything along the way. There's the isometrics and the foam rolling and the all the different methods that people try to add to the ATG system. It's not that he hasn't seen them or that they haven't been brought forward as possibilities. His experience that just hasn't brought the best results. I think all programs that I'm seeing, or a lot of programs now, having ATGs having an influence on those programs, whether they're valuing the concentric phase of the Nordic more and expecting their athletes to get to that full range, whether the sleds have come in, whether there's a tibialis machine in the gym that, would have been very, very unlikely to see, or, tib bar. It seems as though almost every, a lot of programs are being influenced by ATG, and that's really just happened in the last 2-3 years. So it does show that there's an open-mindedness in the strength and conditioning community, even if they're not talking about ATG or they don't fully understand why they're doing what they're doing. There's definitely a change there. Is there a change that you're seeing in the physio world?
Yeah, I think so. I think the influence that Ben has had is cannot be understated, even in the physio world. And I guess today is, I'm getting a little bit older now compared to the guys coming out of uni, but it's a social media world. And so if you're in a health and fitness industry, you'd be living under a rock if you haven't heard of the knees over the toes guy. Okay, so guys are coming out of uni. People will look at it at times with clickbait and go, not everyone should be doing a KOT squat. But if you look at the whole scaled program and see where it starts from, then people start opening their eyes and realizing that there's actually some method to the perceived madness of what they see first off. And so, I think the lines between physio and S&C in Australia definitely are becoming blurred, and physiotherapists are required to be robust with their knowledge and to be able to carry a conversation with an S&C coach. If not, most physios are coming out and doing the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association certs, which probably a little bit behind the times, but it's better than nothing. It's a slow turning wheel. And then on the other side of it, S&C guys are turning up to rehab and sports medicine conferences and courses, like the course we were at the other week. Over half of S&C guys looking to see how we address early stage rehab. So it's great to see, and the physio world will continue to evolve. It's just a slow turning wheel.
Yeah, I think ATG has brought a lot of physio rehabilitation, injury prevention, prehab type concepts and made them really cool and scaled to the point where they become performance exercises. It really has. It's probably aimed more at the physio world. It's probably having more impact on people who would usually go and see a physio, or who haven't had the results that they'd like to have at a physio. Like, that is probably a bigger percentage of the clients potentially than guys who they're already doing well and they want to go to the next level. They're not the primary, they're not the most likely people to be fanatics of the ATG system. It's the people who are on the scrap heap, who've tried everything, who've had the surgeries, who've been to the specialists, who've spent a bunch of money. They tend to be the ones that have been most passionate. And it's interesting to think about that now, of like, this is stepping into what physios, and so I guess some of those physios are going to feel like their toes are being trodden on, but all we really want to see, all everyone wants to see or should want to see, is the results, like that people are getting to the place that they want to be, that careers are being allowed to happen, that athletes are avoiding catastrophic, avoidable injuries. The kid who sits in the chair from age 4 to age 18 or 22 is doing stuff to counteract the impact of that chair. Everybody should be on the same page of, something needs to be done. The incidence of ACLs and all the rest are more than what they should be. It's up to every individual coach and physio to decide what makes sense for them, where it fits. Ideally, everybody, gets better results, and that's what we all want, right? Like, we all want better results, and if there are ways that the system is missing things, then that's cool. Like, everyone does use the system and the principles in different ways. The thing that I have been most passionate about is getting the principles across so that there's more experimentation, because the exact exercise selection and the exact sets and reps I think is always going to be a very artistic thing that is not going to be able to be defined by the science, exactly what one person needs in their specific instance. But the underlying principles, I feel, of like, I didn't understand the ATG principles. 20 years of working as a strength coach and being obsessed about it, I hadn't come across like the key concepts that now I can't imagine operating without them. What do you think it will take for those principles to get out there, or are they worth coaches and physios exploring?
Yeah, I think what Ben has shown and what people see online is they see the end game of where he's at, and that's your point B. What people didn't realise was the ATG system is built to start you at point A, and there's a really logical framework to get you to where you want to go. And I think prior to the ability to bring us all together, point A generally was the physio realm and point B is the S&C realm. But now we've got a bit of a roadmap, and I don't see I don't see why a physio couldn't take someone from point A to point B, and I don't see why an S&C coach couldn't take someone from point A to point B. The direction of that point A to point B is going to be different depending on the individual and their goals, and different because of the coach. And the coach will have a natural bias towards based on his personal experience and his cultural background and where he's working and the people around he surrounds himself with, or she. But I think everyone should be sitting on the same table in that regard. And I think it is only a matter of time before it becomes a lot more mainstream, even to the point of institutionalized education programs.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of thinking about. It's like athletes just want the results, and they're kind of leading this change because they're like, I'm doing this and it feels good, and you all should know about this. Like, and so the coaches are often, and physios are often being brought the solution from the athlete who's asking, hey, have you seen what this guy's doing? Have you seen what this guy's doing? This actually feels good for me. Can we bring it into the program? That's a lot of what's kind of leading this change. And then at the other end is the kind of the gatekeepers of knowledge, those textbooks and people who are running big organizations that have a lot of money, and they work with together with the insurance companies, and it seems as though it's going to take a lot of coaches saying, hey, these books need to be changed. That seems like it's going to be the slowest turning wheel.
Yeah, it will be, but it's also not
which is probably a good thing.
Yeah,
because if every new idea went straight into the books, it probably, if all the fads that come and go probably don't deserve to get into the books, and we'll see whether this one hangs around and what concepts make it.
There's two ends of the extreme, right? You go all in on a system like this at one end, and then there's completely wipe your ass with it at the other end. And I think it's going to take some time. However, I see more and more young physios, more and more young S&Cs not going down the masters and postgrad pathway because of all the online certs that are out there and all the options and mentorships and internships, because of the real world practical experience you're getting from people that are up at the coalface and can show you results and can show you the path.
Be an interesting thing if one of the US education bodies, one of the big colleges in the US decided to offer an ATG influenced exercise science degree or postgrad certificate or something, that it doesn't have to be branded like that. But if it's made clear we're working off these principles, it'd be interesting to see how that did for them commercially. And I think that's, maybe that's where it's going to happen, that some of the ones in the States where it's big money, might just go, hey, the kids want this. They're going to pay for it. The parents are going to pay for it, or they're going to take a loan out for it. Let's go.
Well, it's economics, right?
It could happen,
yeah. The wave of interest can dictate that a little bit. I mean, we saw it happen in the States 10, 15 years ago with the FMS, and the function movement systems guys have been able to embed the clinical version of that, the SFMA, selective functional movement assessment. That's part of some of the curriculums now. And I think there's a lot of knockers on the FMS, but there's some good logical systems in that around giving people a framework for just gauging movement assessment. And that's part of some uni degrees now. So it can happen from a commercial product to embed itself in education.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's about better than before, right? Like I looked at the Gray Cook stuff. I was lucky I worked with Hayden Knowles at the Parramatta Eels, and he was on whatever mailing lists and getting sent out catalogs. Like this is the days where before T Nation and internet was kind of just in the early, and he would order all these books of like the latest stuff coming out in the States. And it was, Gray Cook and Mike Boyle and, Tudor Bomper and Mauro Di Pasquale's book, The Anabolic Diet. Like, so he bought all the books and he said, hey, read these and tell me what you think. And I loved it. I didn't have any budget for books at that time. And it was pretty revolutionary to me. I just finished my degree, or I was just at the end of my degree. And to be honest, like the degree didn't really capture my heart and soul. I was more interested in the social life, and a lot of the subjects seemed very abstract. I didn't even know what I wanted to do, but it still didn't seem relevant without, part of the reason I didn't know where I might use it. But anyways, those books had a big impact on me. And I think there were a lot of great concepts in those books that were better than what came before, because what came before was Arnold Schwarzenegger, bodybuilding, and there's good stuff about that too, especially for bodybuilding. But bodybuilding, powerlifting was really kind of in its infancy then. It wasn't very popular. But weightlifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding, strongman is almost where all strength training came from, right? And these guys were sort of saying, hey, that's not the same as this. Like if your goal is to get this bar over your head, you're never going to use your hip flexors. Like, so you don't train your hip flexors at all, but our guys need to be able to pick their legs up. So, maybe we need hip flexors. That didn't seem to be there, I guess, in those early things. I don't remember any mention of that concept, but at least the concept of, being able to get into a full squat position, being able to get your arms overhead, like these concepts were there in some of that work. And I see what Ben's done as being next evolution on that in terms of simplicity. And maybe Charles was probably also highly influenced, or he was part of that era of development of concepts. I think the way Charles did things was, the way the Poliquin Institute, I should say, because there were a lot of people there. And when I talk about Ben, I'm really talking about ATG, because there have been a lot of different influences on Ben as well, which, have formed the ATG program. It's all evolution. And I think that trending away from strength sports and bodybuilding, like where strength culture has kind of come from, towards what does the human body need is what we're experiencing. The two biggest ones that I think have done a phenomenal job that have built on the Poliquin stuff is Ben in one side, and then Ido Portal, who you mentioned before and who I went and interned with, and I've been to a number of his events. They seem to be the two best next evolutions of how do we use strength training for humans rather than strength training for weightlifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding. How much impact has Ido had on the way you think about training?
Yeah, huge. So my path was similar to yours, actually. Gray Cook was probably the one which enlightened me coming out of a physiotherapy degree, and looking at that functional movement sort of systems approach. From there, it was Erwin Lacour. From there, it was Katie Bauman. And then eventually to Ido.
That's my favorite book. That's the book I recommend. Move Your DNA. I think is probably the best book written about movement.
Absolutely. Blew my mind. And then Ido, I went to a few workshops with Ido, and again, it just a whole nother paradigm shift from underlying philosophy and approach to physicality, to movement, to strength training, to the ability to marry up the common threads amongst all sports around the globe and pick apart the best parts of it and bring it together and leave what's not relevant off the table. That was a big takeaway from me. Started to try and go down that path of, like everyone probably did, and master a number of those skills, and then quickly realized that I continue to want to evolve in other areas as well. And so still it's heavily influenced and rings out the back, and hand balancing still part of my practice. But going full into the method and the movement approach, for me, with my love for part of the sport, it wasn't sort of 100%, and I don't think it needs to be for everyone. It's just use what you use from them, and pick apart from other people as well, and find what works for you. Heavily influenced.
It's probably the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of user friendliness for application. Like to me, Ito's, I feel like it's a great shame that Ito's work hasn't influenced the majority of coaches that much in the strength and conditioning world, in the average gym. There's definitely an influence, and hanging and resting in the squat position most people are relatively, like most coaches have been challenged with that idea at least. Now it's maybe fading away. Like he's sort of, I think he wanted to build a select group of kind of a special forces that really wanted to go all in on his method, and he's done that, and that's working. Where I always look at things of what's going on in the world and what's the solution to this. And he's got a really good solution. Ben Patrick is talking about a school system. My mind goes to the school system. It should be the Ito Portal curriculum of, take him from this point to that point over the course of 10 years of being a 5-year-old to being a 15-year-old. I can't, that is just a phenomenal base for a human to have if you had the time, and with body weight, the depth of what you get there. Yes, it's good to play a lot of sports, and yes, the ATG is a phenomenal foundation for coming back from anything and building that strength and conditioning foundation. But there is something very special about being able to develop that big base. And when you're a child, it's probably the time where you would latch on to all those things and do all those somewhat tedious challenges that are there within that movement culture. Have you sort of thrown around any of those thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and one of the real passions of mine getting back into the private sector is to try and shift the curve with physical inactivity with kids. And we've got, as I mentioned earlier, the Track Stars program, which is a junior running program, to try and just build kids' intrinsic love for getting moving and running with freedom and not putting too many constraints on them. And that's been growing rapidly and taken up by a lot of schools around here. But building a movement school concept around that is, the missing piece as well. Just getting kids playing again like we used to, getting them crawling around, playing on the monkey bars, balancing with their hands. If we could shift the curve to normalize that, I think what we're seeing with the broken sort of Western society of obesity, pain, presentations, the hospitalization costs, comorbidities, a lot of that would be significantly reduced.
You can learn to self-manage so much if you once you understand some of these concepts with hanging, with getting into a squat position, with being able to split squat, with being able to open up you can self-manage with very little time and effort. If you know those things from childhood, then you'll just do them as an adult, and you're much less likely to fall into use of chronic pain medications or joint replacements or a lot of these things, which, I mean, we're getting into politics almost to discuss that, but the Mark Bell podcast with Ben and Kelly Starrett, they started to bring this conversation back. What if we had the kids sit on the floor and
absolutely
walks
and even I mean, I know you've got some strong thoughts around the education sort of path that we've our schools have taken over the past 50 to 100 years, but there is a base level of competency that it's expected for mathematics and science and English, but physical competency is just so far removed from our educational pathway. It's not even thought upon as relevant. We go into this early skill specialization for being able to play hockey or water polo, but giving people robust tools to be able to manage their physicality for the rest of their lives should be priority number one. And some of that early work with like George Hebert and the sort of early French schooling back in the 1800s, looking at some of those concepts. It was part of that sort of JFK education program in the 60s. We've fallen a long way from that sort of level, which is sad, and we just keep lowering the standards. So I heard my niece at school, the base acceptance rate for year threes was to be able to do 2 chin-ups for one of the testing parameters. No one was passing, so instead of putting more phys ed in, they've taken it down to 1 chin-up. So it's a sad state of affairs.
It's probably ahead of a lot of schools, but yeah, John Taylor Gatto's writing, I think, is some of the most powerful stuff. If people are interested in going further with the education, weapons of mass instruction, is some of that stuff. He's got some great talks on YouTube if you want to listen to him speak. Unfortunately, he passed away a year or two ago. I was shattered when I heard that he wasn't with us any longer. But it's not just that the standards aren't imposed, it's that it's actually actively being taken away from them by taking playgrounds out, by reducing the time, by imposing more rules, by just the fact that they have to get up, get dressed, sit in a car, be at school, get home, do their homework. Like there's actually that, it's not, they would just do it spontaneously. Like we would maintain physical activity spontaneously if we're given an opportunity, the same way that a rat does. It's probably a rude comparison, but if you give a rat its natural environment, it's athletic as anything. The same thing happens for children. And, I see the positions that my children are in all day. They maintain themselves and they're able to do things, and they challenge and they climb and they'll do it spontaneously. It's not even that it's great if we teach them and they progress towards being able to do a lot of stuff. But if we let them have some time to explore it themselves, that would also help.
You put them in an environment where they have that freedom and choice, and they'll naturally gravitate towards that because play is just such an integral part.
I've had rings and ropes and stuff hung in different houses. We've moved a lot. And when there's a ring or a rope anywhere around that they can get to, they inevitably have games on there. They just jump on there. Like I don't tell them to do it. It's spontaneous. And that's how they use the environment. But if the environment is shaped in such a way that doesn't exist, like if a classroom did have a set of rings and there was an opportunity for children to use those rings, all the kids would be able to do skin the cat and, the chin-ups, and they just do it, but it's
I think shifting the needle is probably where enforcing it probably is the direction in terms of trying to embed it back into our curriculums and offer alternatives, because a lot of the parents won't do it off their own bat. So providing options for that. But yeah, it's only half the year.
Yeah, I struggle with the regulation side of it. And they had that discussion. I think Mark Bell didn't feel that comfortable with these sorts of things being regulated in, where Kelly Starrett was calling for the regulation. I have concern of giving more power of, what's to be done. I prefer, my mind goes more to like the disruption concept of, taxi drivers got disrupted by Uber because the service wasn't very good relative to the price, relative to the way that it could be done in another way. And hotels are kind of had that same challenge with Airbnb. And there's a few industries that haven't changed that much, and education is a massive industry. It's a huge amount of money that's going into these universities and the school system. You think it's free education. There's no such thing as free education. The teachers are being paid, and they're being paid by the money that everybody's putting into that system. So taxation, unless you think your tax bill is for free, that you're not actually paying tax, then you are paying for the education system. And therefore, what are you getting for your money? In any other thing, if you buy something and it's not very good, then you ask for your money back or you ask for it to change. But because of that two-step process between taxation and the school system, it doesn't have that same accountability. I think we're going to see more accountability for the education system. I think we're going to see more accountability for countries and sovereignty and citizenship. There's pressure. Hopefully there's pressure going to come on some of the countries that the citizens are very unhappy with the way that their politicians have behaved. I see, Satoshi Island and Crypto Island, projects popping up of like, hey, we're going to work with small governments that don't have a lot of money to make a deal with them that we can have a place where we do things differently, and the concept of sovereign individual. But, it's just another example of, it's a bit of a tangent, but how do we take this into our own hands, and what does it look like? How does it look? Where could homeschooling, because homeschooling isn't a valid solution for a lot of people, but where can these concepts be brought into a commercial environment, whether it's with Steiner schools and Montessori, which I know a lot more people are looking for those sorts of schools. Maybe they're able to be influenced more, and then that has a flow-on effect. Then it comes down also to economics of, you're already paying the tax, so then can you afford to pay for the schooling twice? You pay for it with your tax to get the free schooling, and then you have to pay again if you want to go to a private school or you want to go to one of these alternative education systems. Hence why I like talking to people about what their financial goals are as well, because it might mean you get to choose what sort of schooling your children go through, as one example.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Like listening to, I think it was Randall Carlson on Rogan the other day. He's looking at creating his own school.
Is he? I didn't get to the end of that podcast. What was the?
So just teaching kids real world practical life skills, getting them outside, teaching them how to change a tire, teaching them how to be able to look after their own finances, teach them a little bit of hard work outside, and allowing them to choose the path they want to go, what books they want to read, what jobs they want to explore, and getting a few other people like-minded like him to help drive that educational platform.
That sounds crazy, doesn't it? How would you have a school system where you learn how to change a tire and stuff like that? Isn't that that's way too radical?
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine if you made them prepare food. I don't know where that would ever come in handy. I suppose we did have cooking classes. I can't throw that at the school system. I had cooking classes for about a year at my high school. I don't know if that's still a thing, but
I'd have to be nut free.
Did you see Ben? Yeah. Did you see Ben Patrick's? He's proposed Common Sense University, and he's put it out on Medium, a 10-year education that he's going to give to his children.
Yeah, I did read that. Yeah.
It sounds like almost the same idea. So we need to connect Randall Carlson and Ben Patrick, and then continue to connect guests of Joe Rogan until the point where Joe Rogan says, actually, this kind of makes some sort of sense. How do we team up with educators, team up with financial backers?
I think Jordan Peterson
could happen.
He had a similar one as well in that last episode. Jordan was keen for it as well.
Jordan Peterson had I saw he had the essay writing. He's got an essay writing app coming out, right? So he's all in for this as well. Like it's starting to become more possible. Like, how much money does it take to get that off the ground as a digital system inside the United States? Probably not much. How much does it cost to have a website that runs with this? And what's that schooling system? They've got it's like, they're like pods. There's a funny name for it. It's sort of popped up and it's become more popular. There's small groups of students that some teachers are actually quitting teaching to go and work in this system.
Not sure.
I was looking at it maybe 18 months ago, but apparently it's sort of really taken off. And it's almost like a group of, say, 5 or 10 families decide they're going to pay an education professional or a number of education professionals. They may even lease out a location, and they educate according to their own values agreed upon, and privately hire that person to do the education. Apparently it's becoming more popular. I'll look it up. And
well, if you can develop a deeper connection with one educator over the course of your schooling journey, it's huge to be able to resonate with that person, use them as a mentor long term, and get the education required.
And the teacher might actually have a better experience of being a teacher as well. They might be able to be paid more or rewarded more for the results that they're getting, and have competitive pressure where they actually show, this is what happened to my students. I've been working with these children. This is what the family said, the parents said, this is what the child can do. Imagine it was like an actual real industry that mattered. Like if you were a strength and conditioning coach or a personal trainer and nobody ever gets to result with you, and you just don't get to keep being a personal trainer, where not that all teachers don't get some teachers get great results and they love what they do and they're very passionate about it. But almost every teacher that I speak to feels as though they're stuck in a place they don't really want to be, and they can't really do what they want to do, and it wasn't what they signed up for. So,
yeah, interesting.
How old are your children?
5 and nearly 3. So 2 girls.
Yep.
So my 5-year-old started at a local primary school this year, actually.
Yeah.
So going well. It's a very activity-based curriculum so far, and a lot of play, which is good. Perth summer is been a scorcher, so we're sort of north of 38, 40 degrees most days. So outside in the water, having a lot of fun.
Yeah, cool. Sounds like a good plan. How's your own training going at the moment?
Yeah, good. I mean, I'm back
outside
running
of the rehab.
Yeah, so back running from a rehab point of view, and then in the gym, I basically followed the Zero program from about week 3 or 4 post surgery. So been following that now for the sort of 4 weeks, and just last week started to get under the bar again and start squatting, which has felt really good, and handle it really well, being able to go through full range. So the prep work I did with the ATG split squat, with the KOT squat, has been really good. Been able to get a full Nordic back, still looks pretty ugly, but we're nearly there. So in that regard, yeah, really, really, really going well. From an upper body point of view, just because of the lower body's been the focus, just playing around and enjoying a little bit of the ring work, a little bit of hand balancing work.
You have a Nordic bench?
No, I've just got some basic benches that where I stack some weight on top, which has got some good like little ankle hooks at the perfect height. So I just put 100 kilos on that. I'm starting to, and it's interesting watching as I get stronger. I need more and more weight to stack on top. So it's been a good journey.
Are your ankles higher than your knees, sort of thing, or are you elevating the knees to be so the shins are sort of parallel to the floor?
It's a pretty tight. Yeah, I'm going shins parallel. It's pretty tight though. Like there's not much. I've got basically doubled over yoga mat, and then I'm pretty much flat. Yeah, so it's been good. It's been good.
How achievable do you?
Sorry, you go.
How achievable do you think Nordics are for the average, athlete? If at a professional level, do you think that will become a norm that everyone's doing Martin St. Louis?
I don't know if the AFL might be a different cohort to what you've experienced with rugby. The AFL, the strength program is still not number one priority, and the time spent with that to be able to get a heavy sort of leg day is sort of 1 to 2 a week. So the time it would take to build that up would be a lot. But I think as we're seeing more and more kids be exposed to it, and so the narrative will change definitely when we're going through that adolescent development and early sort of first to second year development program usage of it. Still very much biased towards eccentric strength in the professional world, especially in Australia. So the Nord boards and not really on the radar too much of that amateurization and rebound back up into flexion. I had a good chat with the guys over in Melbourne who own the Veld technology and have done all the study around the Nord board, and they didn't really have a lot of answers for me when I asked them when I quizzed them about what we're looking at from an eccentric only sort of strengthening point of view, rather than training at outer range flexion and the ability to stop at that end range.
To me, it seems like the most valuable part would be the part that they're not testing. Seems like most athletes can't hold their body weight up past a certain degree, that in the relatively straight-legged position, that's where the hamstring injuries are actually happening, and probably where the ACL injuries are generally happening as well, past the degree of closer to straight than the point where they're losing tension on the Nord board. Is that fair to say? Or
absolutely. And again, the common sort of thread that most people are going down to get stronger is to add weight in that eccentric phase. So holding weight plates and dumbbells to go through that without even going anywhere near that hover and return period, let alone do it from the floor, from a rested lengthened position. Why would you? Sorry, you go again.
Why would you add weight if you can't control it the whole way down?
Try and shift that length tension curve is their theory.
You'd be shortening the be shortening that would make you more prone to hamstring injuries.
Well, as you get longer towards the end of that range, I think they're trying to hold on the weight a little bit longer there, and so trying to shift it into that lengthened position. But again, not respecting the return phase with anything other than hammy curls.
Yeah, but even I think you can get really good results with eccentrics only. Like I am a fan of having the concentric there, and especially being able to do like the cheetah reps where you stop and go back. To me, that is going to deliver a lot higher returns in terms of injury prevention. Just if you look at the physics of it, if you look at the tissue tension, which surely matters. But why would they accept not holding that tension until almost straight legs? Like, it should more so be that they're using assistance rather than resistance because they're not strong enough to get to a nearly straight leg.
Yeah, well, a lot of them are
going to make you fail earlier.
Yeah, a lot of them are chasing numbers as well. So on that Nord board.
Yeah, okay. So you get a higher peak because you're holding weight. So you get that higher peak tension, but the peak tension is at a degree, at a level of knee flexion that doesn't really make that much sense.
Will be less than the braking force of, yeah, absolutely.
So I had the chance to work with an athlete who's had chronic hamstring injuries, sort of career-threatening, 24 superstar player. And he said his Nord board numbers they were really happy with, super strong. I said, can you touch your toes? He said, no. I said, well, he'd been to Melbourne, he'd been to the guys, the PhD. And obviously everyone's doing their best, so it's not a knock, but what do you think about that scenario? Like, what's going on physiologically where you can't touch your toes, but you're all good, green light, with chronic potentially career-ending issues?
People haven't put a lot of credit into flexibility. People don't see it being as important as strength. In a lot of the strength training communities that I've seen, I think the three pieces of hamstring injury management and prevention of strength through the hamstrings, length through the posterior chain, and strength and control in the anterior chain, well, way out of balance, and we're way down the strength pathway just for that hamstring tissue to try and get numbers. But unless you are, if you are so anteriorly tilted and trying to hold on through that and not addressing your length and extensibility through that posterior chain, as well as balancing it out with some hip flexor strength work, abdominal strength work, I think we're barking up the wrong tree.
So strong anterior pelvic tilt is going to mean more loading on the hamstrings, which is often related to the psoas being hypertonicity, like super tight, often in response to being weak as well. Is that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then also, if you're continuing to get stronger and stronger, in excessive anterior tilt, that's in hip flexion, right? So your ability to maintain hamstring load into hip extension isn't being addressed at all. And so when you run, then if you're not addressing the lengthening component and the activation component at the front, you're not extending well through triple extension, you're not getting gluteal activation, overloading the hamstring even further. I just can't see it being the right approach.
So to me, it's apples and oranges with if you're measuring peak tension at a fairly short or what degree are people failing at? It's probably, it's not 90 degrees. It's a little bit further. So they're getting to maybe 130, 135 degrees, something like that on the Nordic. If that's where peak tension is being achieved, we're comparing apples to oranges if we're saying, the muscle can handle a lot of tension at 135 degrees. That doesn't mean it's going to handle a lot of tension with the legs straight, like with 180 degrees kind of in that example, or 170 degrees. To me, if we have those principles of tension with the short and long range, then you're getting less tension, even if it's peak tension at 135. It's nothing like the amount of tension that you can get in an RDL where, and this gets a bit more abstract in terms of the lengthening of the posterior chain and kind of the whole fascial thing. But you can get so much more tension with maximal or near maximal loads on an RDL, on standing good mornings, on exercises where there's a lot of load going in there. It's going to be a lot more tension because you have the tension of the connective tissue together with the muscle contraction. So if you're lifting double body weight on the RDL, there's already a ton of tension there with the empty bar. Take someone with a hamstring injury and take him to maximal range RDL. They're telling you, hey, there's tension here. Like there's already something going on here. Whereas in that Nordic position, if they're in that position, there's no tension yet, like passively in that tension versus passively in the same position with the RDL. So we need to, like, joint specific matters, like the joint position matters and total tension on the tissue matters. Like I'm not really even talking about, it is flexibility, but it's like, can you create tension? Can you deal with tension in that position? That's the position that matters. The 135-degree position doesn't matter as much, and there's not as much tension there as in the 170-degree, type position. And when you add in, forward leaning or whatever the posture is where potential injury might happen, top speed running.
Has anyone mucked around with doing Nordics off an elevated surface to engage hip flexion at the end range as well?
Elevated in which way, like downhill or uphill?
So downhill. So as you drop down,
comes in earlier.
You then fold at the hips as well at the bottom. So then you're getting towards your RDL position, but from a Nordic. So you're just changing the sort of perpendicular effect of gravity at the hips as well.
You're in the ideal position, but the tension all goes off that you don't feel stretch. People think, you think it's a stretch, but it's not really a stretch. Like, you don't feel stretch in that position. You feel unloaded. So yeah, you're kind of replicating it, but the physics of it you'd have to be upright, and then that doesn't work either on a Nordic, like to have that where it really feels like a stretch. Yeah. I don't think the physics are, it's sort of more so like sit and reach, like loaded sit and reach in some way, where you have to push through the floor to get yourself out of the sit and reach would be like, which is effectively somewhat like the seated good morning. If you want high hamstring adaptation, seated good morning is the way to go. If you want low hamstring adaptation, then the Nordics are great. And RDLs kind of get a good mixture, probably a bit more towards the high, but maybe not as biased as the seated good mornings, I would potentially say.
Yeah. Some of the flywheel positions you can get yourself into is the other way to go.
Yeah, I'm super excited for. I bought 3 flywheels and they're all in storage, so I haven't had that much of a chance to play around with flywheel training. It seems to me, what is it for you? That's like your experience with it, interest in it?
Limited experience. We got one sort of right at the end of my tenure at the club, so it was sort of July by the time we got it. So the players were in middle of the season. We'd had the squat, what do we call it? K-box squat going for a while. However, for the hamstring, we had it wall mounted and getting the guys at 90-degree hip flexion and working them into that outer range. And yeah, I mean, we played around with it. We didn't really have a meaningful intervention with anyone, but I think there's massive upside. So I'd love to hear if anyone does get deeper into the weeds with it.
Yeah, if you being able to manipulate that short, long curve with the flywheel by getting yourself in different positions, like seated hamstring curl with the flywheel in the way that West Side Barbell would like sit on the bench, pull the band towards you. If you do that with a flywheel, you're getting more of that short. You got hip flexion, so there's a lot less tension. Great way to activate a muscle. Great way to have a really muscle dominant exercise. And then in that other position that you're sort of talking about, where you got to do donkey calf raises, but the foot's getting pulled forward, the toes are getting pulled forward. You get mad stretch and strength from that position. The adaptations have to be significantly different. It doesn't make sense to me that you're not going to get more connective tissue laid down within the muscle. Like they talk about the fascicle length. There's going to be more connective tissue laid down within the muscle, because the muscle is going to respond of like, oh, he's doing stuff, it's not a conscious thing, but it's a physiological thing of there's stuff happening here that's threatening to tear this tissue. We need to, it's just a lot different if it's under stretch, that concept hasn't really, I think the bodybuilding world is ahead of the strength and conditioning world with thinking of a hamstring exercise, where the bodybuilders know that stretched position is different and valuable. If you look at stuff like Mountain Dog, John Meadows was a friend of Charles Poliquin and a great bodybuilding coach. Rest in peace. He passed recently, but you look at his workouts, like he sequenced things from, he used short and long range strategically, through his workout to develop the muscle optimally. And he knew that he was going to get different adaptations. He knew that it would influence the hypertrophic effect. Some guys have tried to say it just matters about the total volume and the time under tension. It doesn't, it matters how much length is there and the quality of the tension. The style of repetitions also makes a big difference. With the flywheel, you're getting that. It depends on the wheel as well. I've tried some different ones, but it can be more of an isokinetic kind of feeling on the concentric where you can't accelerate. So that means you get to strengthen all the range more so neurologically. And then on the way back, you can decide where you receive the whack of the load. Like you can choose to receive it really fast, or you can choose to like gradually slow it down and then speed it up again. So there's so much potential if you understand these concepts of short and long range, if you understand the concepts of tension, and then you can play with, the eccentric, the brand from New Zealand, they have the one that, you can power up even more. Yeah. Exafly, is that the?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. They have one that's got a battery in it. So it gives you more than you even put into it.
Oh, wow.
And you can quantify things. So to me that, I can see the flywheel, and there's some studies. There was a study, I listened to a Martin Burkham. Did you ever see Lean Gains? Lean Gains was like a viral. Have you heard of Keno Bodies, Greg O'Gallagher?
Yep.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a controversy that he kind of borrowed some of the concepts from Martin Burkham, Lean Gains. Okay. And Martin Burkham was like in phenomenal shape, super lean guy, and he was blogging, like one of the early guys to sort of go viral around body composition and as a young guy. So he had a podcast recently. His podcast a unique style, kind of hilarious in a way. He's got a really like aggressive interviewing style. So he's interviewing this guy who did this research, and they just got off the charts hypertrophy results using flywheel training together. And it was like high repetition and low repetition stuff. And the study was meant to be about like muscle endurance and hypertrophy. But what they showed was they got a hypertrophy result that's sort of the best that's ever been seen in research studies. And he was sort of grilling one of the researchers about the result that they got. But I think there's something there. I think there's something to it. And I just don't think because of the cost of flywheels and, they're a bit obscure and they're just not what we've always done. They haven't made their way in, but I love that feeling of tension that they give. It's very different. If you're doing slant board, flywheel squats, and you're really grinding it up, and then it's pulling you back down into it. I just love that sensation. To me, it's there's got to be something going on there that is and getting into the weeds of the connective tissue adaptation and the neurological changes. There's Marinovich. Did you come across the Marinovich?
Yeah, that documentary, right?
He's got that documentary about his son, Todd Marinovich. The dad and his brother, Merv Marinovich, and then there's another guy. They developed the training system, right? So they had this prodigal son. They're both of them, but one of them, I don't know if it's Merv or the other one. I'm not remembering the other one's name, but they actually used quite a lot of isokinetic type stuff. It's quite innovative training, and it sort of. So one of them played for the Raiders. He was an NFL player, and he played, and then he sort of and he was crazy strong in the powerlifting movements and stuff. But then he thought, well, this is not the best thing. Like, what is the best thing? And he put the best thing into practice with his son Todd, and he was going to be NFL quarterback star based on this system that he'd been through. But the point is they used quite a lot of the isokinetic type strength work and different mechanics of loading. And I think if we're really analyzing this concept of tension and how the tension is created, what's muscle dominant, what's connective tissue dominant, then it leads us to, okay, well, what equipment delivers this in the way that we specifically want it? Because when you just deal with dumb weight, there's a sticking point and the rest of the range of motion is not getting trained optimally. It's fine if you train for weightlifting or powerlifting because that's what you're going to deal with. But in the real world environment or for an athlete, you don't want to only be strong at the sticking point on your bench press and squat. That doesn't make any sense. Like, so why are we still operating as if that were the case? Bands and chains move us in that direction of like developing the strength curve differently. But it seems as though, the flywheel and there's other machines, there's variations of the Smith machine now that have different possibilities built into them as well. And some of the like loaded sled type concepts and cable, all of this stuff, when you look at it through the lens of long and short and you look at it through the lens of tension training rather than strength training, like we don't actually care how much weight is being lifted. We care about how much tension is being created and at what rate it's being created. Do we want to create it slow? Do we want to create it fast? Like, do we want amortization? I think we're like on the verge of some really good progress with the ATG being the foundation, so we don't feel so much fear about flaring up tendons because we know how to deal with that stuff. And then where can that go with the best of high end performance stuff? Which I'm not sure. Ben's not necessarily interested in getting that extra 0.01 for the world's best 100-meter runner. It's like 99% of athletes need a bigger foundation, and the ATG stuff and the ATG elite standards, which he's just started to release, like very few people will get to them to kind of need this conversation that we're having, but maybe athletes will get there faster as well, doing some of the exact same stuff on a flywheel versus using straight weight, and these are kind of questions that I'd love to see research, but more so practitioners, like what's really happening there. And maybe this podcast will help to spark a few other conversations with people who you need to talk to this guy and that guy, and maybe that will help with developing this.
Yeah, I think we've got all the tools there, but looking at the tools through a different lens and changing our philosophical sort of direction into it, we can create very, very different outcomes. So it's exciting to see which way we go with it.
Yeah, linking it all together, it creates so many possibilities that it needs a lot of people to work on it in different ways and share what they're doing. In the way that I'm really interested in crypto and cryptocurrencies and the future of the financial system. What's cool in cryptocurrencies and the way it evolves so quickly is a lot of it is open source, and so anyone can go and look at what anyone else is doing. And a lot of strength and conditioning is closed source, where you don't know what all the other top teams are doing because you're looking for that competitive advantage. But who ends up suffering? Well, a lot of the teams, but ultimately, like the players, are not getting to express their best because of that competitive nature. And I know not all coaches are like that, and I think almost all coaches are out there looking for what's best practice. But maybe the ATG spark and a lot of it being done in the private scene will be able to accelerate the progression for professional sport and people who, athletes who want to get to that top level.
Yeah, I think, as I said, the younger generation coming through, having that in their toolbox to then be given the opportunity and to show the old firm there's a different way to go about it. Like you were able to show what you learnt from the Poliquins and the Portals to the people that hadn't been exposed to that. I think it's just a natural rate of progression.
Yeah. It's gonna. I'm excited to see how coaches innovate and progress it in their own ways. I think the shoulder stuff within ATG is phenomenal. In the upper body, I think it's done really well. I also think that someone who's a baseball or a quarterback coach when they really dive deep into these principles, they're probably going to come up with some other stuff that will take this even further potentially, and systemizing it and making it, well known. I'd say that a lot of the upper body stuff in ATG hasn't really got that much attention, and so therefore shoulders are still tight, thoracics are tight, and there's exposure to risk that it doesn't need to be there. The upper body system isn't going viral like the sleds and
Perfect example though. I last week saw a guy who's come in 7 weeks ago, calisthenics sports athlete in his 40s, heavy volume of handstand push-ups, ruptured his tricep tendon. Bottom of a handstand push-up, snap, knocked himself out, unfortunately. So went in and and I'd never seen one of these. A lot of biceps along the way, but never seen a tricep go. And so had surgery. So he came to see me 6 weeks post-surgery. I had a quick look through what's out there in literature, a few studies out of North America, and just very, very conservative approaches, where a lot of them are saying don't load the tendon until 12 weeks, which for me, looking at him, I look at him as an upper body athlete, and I use the analogy that that's the same as a quad tendon repair. He wants to be able to weight bear through that arm, the elbow functioning at the knee. Why can't we follow a quad tendon repair protocol for that? You're not going to be getting the progressive gait loading that he does get, but why can't we work on short range work straight away and start to get blood flow to the area, accelerate some healing? Body weight to start with. When I first got him in, he couldn't take his arm in a tricep kickback to full extension because of deconditioning. And within a few days of just some really basic short range work in different positions, which didn't challenge gravity as much, he was pumping that out. He was doing 1-2 kilos. Now we're 8 weeks down the track and he's progressing on a little bit more. So he's an exciting one to look to keep sort of track of his journey. And then whether we can get him to handstand push-ups, I can't really see why not. But the difference will be the volume of loading, of cyclical loading that someone gets for their quad tendon just through daily gait to build the robustness of that tissue compared to his tricep. So he's going to need to put in a hell of a lot of time on his hands before we start to push forward any further.
That's the Ido Portal, paradigm almost of be crawling, be doing all the, the groundwork type stuff.
Yeah.
Have just load going through the upper body, the handstands, like not about pushing really hard, but just time.
Yeah. Trying to find the 10,000 step principle for the arms.
Yeah.
And see how we go with it.
I mean, thinking about like whether because tricep kickbacks, in theory, it's shorter, lower tension than tricep extensions, like a cable tricep extension. But I wonder whether the component of the active shoulder extension makes that more challenging in that scenario to do tricep kickbacks with no weight or with, a limited weight, just working against the tension of the biceps. That's something that people probably don't consider as well, is like someone who has really tight biceps, if you put them in that tricep kickback type position, then even with no weight, there's significant tension potentially. But what are your thoughts about?
Yeah, absolutely. I was, I think the long-headed tricep will be under a little bit more tension back there for sure. For him, I was a bit reticent to give him any extra load other than what his own body could move. So getting him into just a tricep push down with a TheraBand, or the other thing I did give him was some gentle weight bearing work against the wall, and then gradually get him on an incline all the way down. Which will start to work that inner range there. But I didn't, I did think of that, but I was conscious I don't want to start to give him some load he'll take that and run with it a little bit.
But like banded extensions, for example.
Absolutely.
Versus kickbacks, what did you experience?
Banded extensions, I think you can probably get a little bit more volume out, because I think you do get a little bit of fatigue holding that arm in extension for quite a while. And then if you start to fatigue out, you'll dump that anterior sort of humeral head forward and potentially start to irritate the shoulder with some pretty average mechanics.
Especially if some calisthenics guys don't open up the chest as much. It depends on which movements he does exactly.
He's very much a pushing-based athlete.
Yeah. And what sort of reps and time were you throwing at that?
I was getting him to do 30 every half an hour. Of his waking days, just keep pumping it. And for blood flow as well as confidence, and just normalize the movement for him, get some confidence.
How long did you get to work with him?
I'm still going. So we're 2 weeks in. I've seen him twice a week, each 2 weeks, and rapid improvements straight away, which has been good. Again, there's still proliferation going on at that tendon site, so I'm not going to go too crazy and speed things up too much, but just follow a bit of a process with it, and probably muck around with some banded work next, and then just keep progressing his weight bearing. I think that sort of closed chain work is going to be important.
So, I think anything you can get like lactic acid, they get that metabolic drive going to the area, even as light as possible. It's probably only a fraction of maximum muscle contraction. Like, probably don't even want him like flexing it. Can he flex it hard, or like is he allowed to?
He's got full range. Yeah, so that's come this week. But again, I'm not. Yeah, I'm allowing him to do a little bit of loaded bicep work, but again, just through sort of a mid-range work at the moment. The other thing I'll probably start to throw in is some BFR stuff as well.
Yeah. I was thinking about the flossing, whether that might come in at some stage, or similar to the BFR, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be an interesting one. It's a little bit of a rare sort of case. I haven't seen too many.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure
anyone out there that's listening in who's got some experience with tricep repairs, get in touch.
I'm sure he's really happy to be able to do something versus 12 weeks and don't do anything is a pretty tough ask for someone who's used to training quite a lot. Like, I mean, you can train your legs and stuff, but I'm sure it's a really good feeling for him to be able to do something.
Yeah, for sure.
I've heard about the tricep, the skull crushers are the ones that I've heard bench press athletes tearing the tricep off the bone. I know I was listening to a podcast the other day actually with I think it's Pat Casey. He's like a legendary bench presser interview with Josh Bryant, talking about that. Josh Bryant seems to respond to things. He's coached a number of guys to world champion bench press results. He's also been a student of Charles. They had a connection there at some stage. And he's a student of Fred Hatfield, who's a legendary, the first, Dr. Squat, the first guy one of the first to squat over 1,000 pounds. He singles him out as a mentor. So he's into the compensatory acceleratory training, like the CAT, which I think is really interesting for a world record breaking bench press coach, because a lot of powerlifters reject the concept of the fast stuff and think it's ridiculous because Westside is so different and so controversial. There's like the overreaction of you can't do anything fast. So Josh Bryant though would probably potentially, if you can get a hold of him, I should try and get podcast, then I can ask him for you.
Absolutely, mate.
I've spoken to him a few times. I wanted to go and see him when I was over there. He lives in Texas, but the ATG is growing in Texas, so it's getting more likely that I'll be there. And there's a few good gyms and stuff there. So
awesome.
I was going to ask as well. There's a question there about ACL injuries and the importance of Nordics. Like, do you see it as an essential to get a strong Nordic, or is it not quite essential but important?
I mean, it is. Hamstring strength is important. If we're talking the ACL in isolation, getting that hamstring and sort of quads ratio back to where it needs to be is critical. In our cohort over here, a lot of the athletes will have an ACL hamstring graft. So, and whether that's on the ipsilateral side, the same side of the knee, or the other side, it will mean that there will be a manufactured hamstring strain, which needs to get strong again. And there's a huge correlation with future hamstring risk of injury post hamstring graft surgery. So in our cohort, Nordics become a critical part. From a ACL in isolation, the sort of posterior translation of the tibia by the hamstring moment at the knee does provide joint stability through there. So having good strength there, whether it's a Nordic or other variations, I think hamstring needs to be part of your program.
Love it. Well, I think we covered a lot there, Steve. I really appreciate your time, and we got to explore a lot of things that I'm very passionate about and excited to see come into light and improving. And I probably should say, like, some of it maybe sounds critical of the existing system. I think it's okay to be critical of the system as long as we're constructive and wanting to build solutions and inviting discussion about what's best and what's better. That's how things improve. Like we have to do that. Everything that I've done, the way that I trained athletes, like, I had coached winning teams but they had chronic niggles and pains, and I didn't know how to prevent some of the things that they suffered from. I'm far from perfect and would do a lot of things differently. That's where we all should be, really, where we look back at what we did 5 years ago and think, I definitely wouldn't do that, and I'm sorry. Ideally, we all continue along that path, and it is it is tough when we're encouraged to change or think of things differently. But if we can do that, ultimately we get better results, athletes get better results, or people that we're training. So the intention is to be really positive with, this is a great opportunity and this is where it's going, and this is what we've seen. But I'm also open to, have you thought about it from this perspective, and what are you missing? And there are a lot of different ways to look at these challenges. And for sure, I don't have all the answers, even though maybe sometimes the tone sounds as though I think I do. But I'm always questioning, and I've changed a lot of opinions over recent times as well. So I hope that comes across as well. Yeah, no, mate, loved it. And I think curiosity is an essential part of life, and if we need to keep exploring, because if we just like the sharks, mate, we don't move, we die. So we've got to keep pushing for the frontiers, question everything, challenge conventional wisdom, look back at the wisdom of the past, and try to improve on that, but always respect everyone's opinion and everyone's where they're coming from, because I think we're all pulling in the same direction. Sometimes some people have louder voices than others, and I think we just need to be respectful in the way we go about it. Yeah, that's the plan. So if anyone feels disrespected, it wasn't the intention, and I'm open to having a discussion about anything and all possibilities.